My name is Susan Davis, though everyone calls me Sue. I'm 58 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law Vanessa tried to erase me from my own son's life, only to discover that when you mess with a mother's family, you'd better be prepared for the consequences. It started on what should have been one of the happiest days of my year. My son Michael's birthday dinner at the house I'd helped him buy, surrounded by the family I'd spent decades building and protecting. By the end of that evening, I'd learned that sometimes the people you welcome into your heart with open arms are same ones who'll try to cut you out of the picture entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's what Vanessa didn't count on when she decided I was disposable. I didn't raise my son for 32 years, survive a divorce, build a successful career, and create the foundation that gave them their comfortable life just to be pushed aside by someone who thought marriage gave her the right to rewrite our family's rules. The afternoon of Michael's birthday started like any other special occasion in our family. I'd been planning this dinner for weeks, just like I always did. Michael had been working crazy hours at his engineering firm, and I knew he'd been stressed about some big project deadline. Vanessa had been complaining about feeling overwhelmed with her new job at the marketing agency, and I thought a nice family dinner would be exactly what they needed. I spent the entire morning preparing his favorite meal, the same beef stroganoff I'd been making for his birthday since he was 8 years old. I bought fresh flowers for the dining room table, the good wine from the cellar, and even picked up that expensive dark chocolate cake from the bakery downtown that he'd mentioned liking a few months ago. I wanted everything to be perfect. The house looked beautiful when I finished setting up. I'd inherited it from my mother 5 years ago, and it had been the gathering place for every holiday, birthday, and family celebration since then. Michael had his own place with Vanessa about 20 minutes away, but this house had always been home base, the place where we celebrated good news, worked through problems, and maintained the connections that make a family more than just people who share DNA. I even made sure to include some of Vanessa's preferences. She'd mentioned once that she didn't like the heavy curtains in the dining room, so I'd bought new ones in a lighter fabric. I'd also prepared a small side salad with that weird dressing she preferred, even though nobody else in the family could stand it. I was always trying to make her feel included and valued. Michael arrived first, around 5:30, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing that slightly tired smile he'd been sporting a lot lately. He hugged me tight and said the house smelled incredible, exactly like he remembered from childhood. We talked about his work while I finished the final preparations, and for a few minutes, it felt like old times. Just the two of us, comfortable and connected, the way we'd always. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes later, and I could tell immediately that something was off. She walked in without her usual greeting, barely acknowledged the effort I'd put into decorating, and headed straight for the living room where she sat down and started scrolling through her phone. When I called out that dinner would be ready in 10 minutes, she just nodded without looking up. During dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael tried to keep the conversation light, talking about work and asking about my recent trip to visit my sister in Portland. I shared some funny stories from the trip, showed them pictures on my phone, and tried to draw Vanessa into the conversation by asking about her new job. She gave short, clipped answers and kept checking her phone under the table. About halfway through the meal, Michael excused himself to use the bathroom, and that's when everything changed. The moment he left the room, Vanessa put down her fork, looked directly at me, and said in a voice so cold it made my skin crawl, "We need to talk." I set down my own fork and tried to keep my voice steady. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "This needs to stop, Sue. All of this." She gestured around the dining room. "The constant family dinners, the weekly phone calls, the way you insert yourself into every decision we make. Michael and I are trying to build our own life, and you're suffocating us." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. I thought you enjoyed our family dinner." "Michael always seems happy when we get together." "Michael feels obligated," she said flatly. "He's too polite to tell you that you're being intrusive, but I'm not. You call him every other day. You show up at our house unannounced. You give your opinion on everything from our furniture choices to our vacation plans. It's exhausting." My hands started trembling, but I tried to keep my voice calm. Vanessa, I love you both. I just want to be involved in your lives. I don't think I've been intrusive. When have I ever shown up unannounced? Last Tuesday, she shot back. You came by with groceries because you thought we might be too busy to shop. 2 weeks ago, you called Michael at work to ask if we were eating enough vegetables. Last month, you rearranged our living room while we were out of town because you thought the furniture flow was better your way. Each example hit me like a physical blow because she wasn't entirely wrong. I had done those things. But they'd come from love, from wanting to help and support them. I was trying to help, I said quietly. We don't need your help, Vanessa replied. We're adults. We can grocery shop and arrange our own furniture and figure out our own problems. What we need is... I heard Michael's footsteps coming back down the hallway, and Vanessa's demeanor instantly shifted. She picked up her fork and started eating again, as if we'd been discussing the weather. Michael sat back down and asked if everything was okay, noticing the tension in the air. Everything's fine, Vanessa said with a bright smile. Your mom and I were just chatting about her Portland trip. I stared at her in amazement. The complete transformation, the ease with which she lied to my son's face, the way she could switch from cruelty to charm in Michael looked between us, clearly sensing something was wrong, but not knowing what. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I went through the motions of serving cake, making coffee and cleaning up, but my mind was reeling. Every interaction I'd had with them over the past year was being recontextualized through Vanessa's words. Had Michael really felt obligated? Was I truly being intrusive? Or was this just Vanessa's way of creating distance between Michael and his family? When they were getting ready to leave, Michael hugged me and thanked me for the wonderful dinner. Same time next month? He asked, like he always did. Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke up. Actually, honey, remember we talked about cutting back on some of our regular commitments. We've been so overwhelmed lately. Michael looked confused. But Mom's birthday dinners aren't commitments. They're family traditions. I know, Vanessa said, linking her arm through his. But maybe we could make them more occasional, like every few months, instead of monthly. I watched my son's face as he processed this. He looked torn, glancing between Vanessa and me. I guess we could discuss it, he said finally. Perfect, Vanessa said, then turned to me with that same bright fake smile. Thanks for dinner, Sue. It was lovely as always. After they left, I sat in my empty dining room surrounded by the remnants of what I'd thought was a celebration and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The house felt different somehow, like the warmth had been sucked out of it. I started clearing the table, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to stop. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, analyzing every word, every tone. Vanessa's accusations felt like a list of crimes I didn't know I'd committed. Was wanting to be close to my son really suffocating? Was caring about their well-being truly intrusive? I'd raised Michael to value family, to understand that we look out for each other. Had I somehow gotten it wrong? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I'd called Michael, all the occasions I'd offered help or advice. In my mind, they'd been acts of love, expressions of the bond between a mother and son, but through Vanessa's lens, they became something darker, more controlling. I thought about Michael's behavior over the past few months. He had seemed more distant lately, less likely to call just to chat, quicker to end our conversations. I'd attributed it to work stress and his new marriage, the natural process of a young man building his own life. But what if Vanessa was right? What if he'd been feeling smothered and was too kind to tell me directly? The doubt was like poison, seeping into every memory, every interaction. I started questioning everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Had I been blind to signals he was sending? Was I one of those mothers who couldn't let go, who tried to maintain control even after their children were grown? But then I remembered Michael's face when he talked about his childhood, the way he lit up when he told stories about our family tradition. I remembered him calling me last year when he was struggling with a difficult decision at work, saying he needed his mom's perspective because I was the wisest person he knew. I remembered him insisting that Vanessa and I needed to get to know each other better because we were the two most important women in his life. Those memories didn't match Vanessa's version of events. They suggested a son who genuinely valued his relationship with his mother, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Not one who felt obligated or suffocated. So why was she trying so hard to create distance between us? What did she gain by isolating Michael from his family? The next few weeks were torture. Michael's calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, the conversations felt stilted and awkward. He seemed to be weighing every word, careful not to reveal too much about his life or plan. When I asked about their weekend activities or mentioned wanting to see them soon, he would deflect or give vague responses about being busy. I tried to respect the boundaries Vanessa had established. I didn't call as often, didn't offer unsolicited advice, didn't make suggestions about their household or relationship, but the distance felt unnatural and painful, like trying to breathe with one lung. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Michael called to cancel our monthly lunch date. He said something had come up at work, but his voice sounded strange, guilty almost. I asked if everything was okay, and he assured me it was, but I could hear Vanessa talking in the background, though I couldn't make out the word. That's when I realized this wasn't about boundaries or healthy independence. This was about control. Vanessa wasn't trying to create space for their marriage to grow. She was trying to eliminate my influence entirely. She saw me as competition, as a threat to her position in Michael's life, and she was systematically working to remove me from the equation. I started paying closer attention to the details, the small changes in Michael's behavior and communication. He stopped mentioning family traditions when we talked, no longer brought up memories from his childhood, avoided making plans that extended more than a week or two into the future. It was as if he was being coached to distance himself gradually, to make the separation seem natural rather than forced. The turning point came about a month after the birthday dinner. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Janet, one of my neighbors who'd known Michael since he was a teenager. She stopped me in the produce section and asked how he was doing, mentioning that she'd seen him and Vanessa at a restaurant the previous weekend. They looked so happy, she said, and Vanessa was telling everyone at the next table about their wonderful news. I'm so excited for you. My heart skipped a beat. What wonderful news? Janet's face fell. Oh no, I assumed you knew. They're expecting. Vanessa said she was about 3 months along. I thought surely they would have told you first. I felt the world tilt sideways. 3 months pregnant. That meant she'd been pregnant during the birthday dinner. Pregnant when she'd told me I was suffocating them. Pregnant when she'd started building walls between Michael and me, and I was learning about it from a neighbor in the grocery store produce section. I managed to keep my composure until I got to my car, but then I broke down completely. This wasn't just about excluding me from their daily lives anymore. This was about excluding me from the most important moments, the milestones that define a family. I was going to be a grandmother and my son hadn't even told me. The betrayal was overwhelming, but underneath it was something even more painful, the realization that Vanessa had succeeded. She'd created enough distance between Michael and me, that he no longer felt comfortable sharing his most important news with his own mother. Whatever bond we'd had, whatever trust and closeness had existed between us, she'd managed to erode it to the point where I was now an outsider looking in on my own son's life. That evening I called Mike. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked how he was doing, hoping he would share the news himself. We talked for about 10 minutes about work and the weather and mundane daily activities, and he never mentioned the pregnancy. When I finally couldn't stand it anymore, I said, Michael, I ran into Janet today at the store. There was a long pause. Then, very quietly, he said, Mom, I can explain. You're going to be a father, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I'm going to be a grandmother, and I had to learn about it from a neighbor. I wanted to tell you, he said, and I could hear the guilt and conflict in his voice. We were going to tell you soon. Vanessa wanted to wait until after the first trimester, make sure everything was okay. Michael, I said, gently. Janet said, Vanessa was telling strangers at a restaurant. She's clearly comfortable sharing the news with some people. Another long pause. It's complicated, Mom. What's complicated about sharing good news with your family? Vanessa he started, then stopped. She's worried about you getting too involved. She wants us to have some time to adjust to the idea ourselves before dealing with everyone else's expectations and opinions. As if I was just another nosy relative instead of his mother, instead of the person who'd raised him and loved him unconditionally for 32 years. The clinical distance in his words broke my heart. Michael, I said, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I love you more than anything in this world. I love Vanessa because you love her. I would never do anything to interfere with your happiness or your marriage. All I've ever wanted is to be part of your life, to support you and celebrate with you and be there when you need me. If that feels like pressure or interference, then I've clearly made mistakes in how I've expressed it. Mom, you haven't made mistakes, he said, and for a moment, he sounded like my little boy again. You're an amazing mother. You've always been there for me, always supported me. It's just that now I have to think about what's best for my marriage too, and sometimes that means making choices that are hard. What does that mean exactly? It means we need some space to figure out how to be parents without feeling like we're being watched or judged or managed. There it was again, Vanessa's language coming out of my son's mouth. Watched, judged, managed, as if loving them and wanting to be involved in their lives was some kind of surveillance operation. I understand, I said, though I didn't really understand at all. I just want you to know that I'm here when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. I know, Mom. I love you. I love you too. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. My son had essentially told me that his wife saw me as a threat to their marriage, that my presence in their lives was something that needed to be managed and limited. The pregnancy news, which should have been a moment of pure joy and celebration, had instead become another example of how thoroughly I'd been pushed to the margins of their world. But there was something else bothering me, something beyond the hurt and disappointment. The way Michael had talked, the careful language he'd used, the way he'd seemed to be reciting talking points rather than speaking from his heart, it all felt rehearsed, like he'd been coached on what to say, how to explain the situation in a way that would make me back off without causing too much drama. I started thinking back over the past few months, looking for signs I might have missed, the gradual decrease in phone calls, the cancelled plan, the way Vanessa always seemed to have an opinion about how much time Michael spent with family, the way she'd positioned herself as the reasonable one setting healthy boundaries while painting me as the overbearing mother who couldn't let go. It was a masterful campaign, subtle enough that Michael probably didn't even realize what was happening, but effective enough to fundamentally alter our relationship in just a few months. She'd managed to make him question his own instincts about family closeness, to see normal maternal love and involvement as something unhealthy and suffocating. The worst part was that she was winning. Every conversation I had with Michael now was filtered through her perspective, every interaction measured against her standards of what was appropriate. I was being trained to accept less access, less closeness, less involvement in my son's life, and the training was working because the alternative was losing him entirely. But as I sat there in my kitchen that night, surrounded by photos of Michael from every stage of his life, from his first steps to his college graduation, to his wedding day, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me and my relationship with my son. This was about the kind of family my future grandchild was going to grow up in. Was this baby going to be raised to see extended family as intrusive outside? Would my grandchild learn that love comes with conditions, that closeness requires permission, that family bonds are something to be managed rather than celebrated? Would this child grow up thinking that it was normal and healthy to cut people out of your life the moment they became inconvenient? I thought about my own childhood, about Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house, about the network of aunts and uncles and cousins who'd helped shape my understanding of the world. I thought about the security that comes from knowing you belong to something larger than just your immediate household, that there are people who will love you unconditionally and support you through whatever life throws your way. That's what I'd tried to give Michael, and that's what I'd hoped to give my grandchild. Not control or interference, but connection, not suffocation, but security, the knowledge that family means something, that these bonds are precious and worth protecting. But Vanessa seemed determined to create a different kind of family structure, one where she and Michael existed in isolation, where outside relationships were viewed as threats rather than sources of strength. And if that was the world my grandchild was going to inherit, then maybe it was time for me to stop playing by Vanessa's rules and start fighting for what I believed was right. the decision didn't come all at once. It built slowly over the following weeks, as I watched Michael pull further away, as conversations became more superficial and visits became less frequent. The final straw came 6 weeks later when I called to invite them to Thanksgiving dinner and was told they'd already made other plans. Other plans with who? I asked. Just us, Michael said. Vanessa thought it would be nice to have a quiet holiday at home, just the three of us. He paused. Well, technically 4 of us now. The casual way he mentioned the baby like it was an afterthought stung almost as much as the rejection itself. Thanksgiving had been our tradition for 32 years, even during his college years, even when he was dating other people, even during the difficult period after his father and I divorced. Michael had always come home for Thanksgiving. What about your grandmother? I asked. She's expecting to see you. She's 91 years old. Michael, how many more Thanksgivings do you think she has? I know, Mom, and I feel terrible about it, but Vanessa's been having a difficult pregnancy, and she just needs things to be low-key this year. Another rehearsed explanation, another way of making their choices seem reasonable and necessary, while making me seem selfish for wanting to maintain family traditions. I was starting to recognize the pattern, the way every conversation was structured to make me the problem. Is Vanessa there? I asked. She's resting. Why? I'd like to talk to her. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. You know how sensitive she's been lately. Sensitive, as if wanting to spend holidays with family was some kind of aggressive act that required delicate handling, as if I was a volatile force that needed to be managed, rather than a loving mother and grandmother-to-be who just wanted to be included in the family she'd helped create. Michael, I said, I need you to put Vanessa on the phone. Mom, please, can't we just leave it alone? We'll do Christmas together. Okay, just let us have this one holiday to ourselves. But I knew there wouldn't be a Christmas together. This was how it would go from now on, one excuse after another, one exception after another, until I was completely removed from the picture. Vanessa had been testing boundaries, seeing how much she could take away without causing a major confrontation, and I'd been letting her do it, hoping that being accommodating and understanding would preserve some connection with my son. Put her on the phone, Mike. There was a long pause, some muffled conversation in the background, and then Vanessa's voice came on the line. Hi, Sue. Michael said you wanted to talk. Vanessa, I understand you're having a difficult pregnancy, and I want you to know that I'm here to support you in whatever way you need. But I also need you to understand that family traditions are important, especially now that there's a grandchild coming. I'd like to find a way to make Thanksgiving work for everyone. Sue, she said in that patronizing tone I was starting to hate. I appreciate that you want to help, but what I need right now is peace and quiet. Large family gatherings are just too much stress for me in my condition. It wouldn't be a large gathering. It would be the 3 of us, plus Michael's grandmother, 4 people, 5, including the baby. Hardly overwhelming. I'm sorry, but we've already made our decision. Michael and I have discussed it thoroughly, and we both agree that this is what's best for our family right now. Our family, not the family that included me, not the extended family that had raised and shaped Michael, but their little nuclear unit that existed independently of everyone else. Vanessa, I said, can I ask you something directly? Of course. What is it that you're afraid of? What do you think is going to happen if we spend a few hours together having dinner and being grateful for our blessings? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had gotten colder. I'm not afraid of anything, Sue. I'm protecting my marriage and my unborn child from unnecessary stress and drama. What drama? What stress? We're talking about a Thanksgiving dinner, not a hostile interrogation. Sue, every time we're together, you make little comments about how we do things. You rearrange our furniture, you question our choices, you act like we're children who need constant guidance and supervision. That's not healthy for anyone, especially not for a pregnant woman. I've never criticized your choices, I said, genuinely confused. When have I ever acted like you need supervision? Last month when you came over and reorganized our pantry because you thought our system was inefficient. 2 weeks ago when you asked Michael if he was sure we could afford the car payment on his new vehicle. Yesterday when you called to ask if I was taking the right prenatal vitamins, because you'd read an article about folic acid deficiency. Each example hit me like a physical blow because, again, she wasn't entirely wrong. I had done those things, but they'd come from love and concern,
not from a desire to control or criticize. I'd organized the pantry because I thought it would help them save time.
I'd asked about the car payment because I worried about their financial stress. I'd called about vitamins because I wanted to make sure my grandchild was getting the best possible start in life. But hearing them listed like that, hearing the irritation in Vanessa's voice, I started to understand how my actions might have been perceived differently than I'd intended them. What felt like love and support to me clearly felt like judgment and interference to her. "I never meant to make you feel criticized," I said quietly. "I was trying to help." "I know you think you were helping," Vanessa said, and her tone softened slightly. "But Sue, we need to figure out how to be adults and parents on our own. We need to make mistakes and learn from them without feeling like we're being monitored or corrected all the time." "So, what are you saying? That I should just stay out of your lives completely?" "I'm saying we need boundaries. Clear, consistent boundaries that respect our autonomy as a married couple and as parents. And one of those boundaries is being able to make our own holiday plans without having to justify them to extended family." Extended family, that's what I'd become in her mind. Not Michael's mother, not the woman who'd raised him and loved him unconditionally, but extended family. Someone whose opinions and feelings were secondary to the preferences of the nuclear unit. "Michael is my only child," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This baby is going to be my only grandchild. I'm not trying to interfere with your marriage or undermine your parenting. I'm just trying to maintain some connection with the family I love." "Sue, I understand that this is hard for you, but you have to understand that Michael's primary obligation now is to me and our child. That's how marriage works. When you get married, your spouse becomes your first priority, your primary family. Everyone else, including parents, becomes secondary." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Secondary. That's what 32 years of unconditional love and support had earned me. Secondary status in my own son's life. Not just secondary, but actively problematic, something that needed to be managed and minimized for the health of their real family. "Does Michael feel that way?" I asked. "Michael feels torn," she said honestly. "He loves you and he doesn't want to hurt you. But he also loves me, and wants our marriage to succeed. And right now, those two things feel incompatible to him." "Because you've made them incompatible," I said, finally allowing some of my anger to show. "You've created a situation where he has to choose between his wife and his mother instead of finding a way for all of us to coexist." "Sue, I haven't created anything. I've simply established boundaries that protect our relationship and our growing family. If you can't respect those boundaries, then yes, Michael will have to choose. And I think we both know what choice he'll make." The threat was clear and devastating. Accept whatever terms Vanessa set, no matter how unreasonable, or lose Michael entirely. She had all the power in this situation, because she had the one thing I could never compete with: his daily life, his bed, his future, his child. "This is what you wanted all along, isn't it?" I said. "You never intended to make room for me and your family. You've been working systematically to push me out from the very beginning." "Sue, I'm not pushing you out, I'm defining what healthy involvement looks like. You can be part of our lives, but it has to be on terms that work for everyone, not just for you. Terms that you get to dictate unilaterally. Terms that Michael and I agree on together." But I knew better now. I knew that Michael wasn't really part of these decisions, that he was just being presented with Vanessa's conclusions and asked to support them. He was caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. And Vanessa was using that conflict to gradually eliminate me from the equation. "I need to talk to Michael," I said. "He's busy right now, then have him call me back." "Sue, I think we've said everything that needs to be said. We'll let you know about Christmas plans when we've had a chance to discuss them." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and the crushing realization that I'd just been dismissed from my own son's life by someone who'd known him for less than 3 years. The next few days were a blur of anger, sadness, and desperate strategizing. I kept replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong and what I could have said differently. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the outcome had been predetermined. Vanessa had already decided that I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be included. and nothing I could have said would have changed that fundamental perspective. I called Michael several times over the next week, but he didn't answer. I left voicemails asking him to call me back, saying I wanted to discuss Thanksgiving and make sure we were all on the same page. He finally texted me 3 days later saying he was busy with work but would try to call soon. He never did. The silence was devastating, but it was also clarifying. This wasn't a temporary rough patch or a misunderstanding that could be resolved with better communication. This was a deliberate campaign to redefine our family structure, with me cast in the role of the intrusive outsider who needed to be managed and contained. I started thinking about what my life would look like if I accepted Vanessa's terms: occasional supervised visits, surface-level conversations, holiday invitations that could be revoked at any time based on her assessment of what was best for their family. Watching my grandchild grow up from a distance, never knowing if my next attempt at connection would be deemed inappropriate or excessive. But I also started thinking about what my life could look like if I stopped playing by her rules entirely. What if instead of begging for scraps of access to my son's life, I focused on building something that couldn't be taken away from me? What if I stopped trying to prove that I deserved a place in their family and started showing them what they were losing by pushing me away? The house I'd inherited from my mother was worth almost $400,000. It was completely paid off, and I'd been planning to leave it to Michael someday. But why should I preserve that inheritance for someone who treated me like an inconvenience? Why should I maintain a family home for people who didn't want to be part of the family? I had a successful career as a real estate agent, good health, financial security, and plenty of friends who valued my company and appreciated my contributions to their lives. I had hobbies and interests that had nothing to do with being Michael's mother or Vanessa's victim. I had a whole identity that existed independently of their drama. Maybe it was time to stop fighting for acceptance from people who'd already decided I was unacceptable, and start building a life that didn't require their approval or participation. That decision crystallized over the following weeks, as I watched my son become a stranger. The man who used to call me just to share funny stories from his day was now someone who sent brief formal text messages in response to my attempts at conversation. The son who had once sought my advice on everything from career moves to relationship decisions was now living a life I knew nothing about, making choices I wasn't consulted on, building a future I was explicitly excluded from. The breaking point came exactly 3 weeks after the Thanksgiving phone call. I was at my real estate office, working on listings and trying to keep my mind occupied, when my assistant knocked on my door and said there was someone to see me. I looked up to find Michael standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My heart jumped. For a moment I thought maybe he'd come to apologize, to tell me that he'd realized Vanessa was being unreasonable and that he wanted to work things out. But as he sat down across from my desk, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, and I knew this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd been hoping for. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath and launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. "Mom, I need you to understand that what happened with Thanksgiving isn't about you personally. Vanessa and I have been talking a lot about boundaries and what we need to feel supported as we start our family, and we've realized that we need to be more intentional about how we spend our time and energy." I listened to this corporate speak version of my son and felt something cold settle in my chest. These weren't his words, weren't his thoughts. This was Vanessa's agenda being delivered in Michael's voice, and the disconnect between the language he was using and the person I'd raised was almost surreal. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means we need to be more selective about our commitment. We can't do every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. We need to prioritize the events that are most meaningful to us and politely decline the rest." And apparently, spending Thanksgiving with your mother and grandmother falls into the rest category. Michael wins. "It's not that simple, Mom. We're not saying no to you specifically. We're saying no to the pressure of constant family obligations." Constant family obligations. We were talking about maybe 6 or 7 gatherings a year, major holidays, birthdays, and occasional dinner. In what universe did that constitute constant pressure? But I could see that arguing the point would only make me look like the unreasonable one, the mother who couldn't understand that her adult son needed space. "Michael," I said carefully, Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you remember when you were 12 and you broke your arm falling off your bike? You were so scared at the hospital, and you held my hand through every x-ray, every procedure. You said I was the bravest person you knew because I stayed calm and took care of everything. His face softened slightly. Of course I remember. Do you remember when you were applying to colleges and you were stressed about the essays? We spent 3 weekends working on them together at the kitchen table. You said you couldn't have done it without me, that I helped you figure out who you were and what you wanted to say about yourself. Mom, where are you going with this? Do you remember calling me last year when you and Vanessa had that big fight about money? You came over at 11 o'clock at night because you needed someone to talk to, someone who knew you well enough to help you think through the situation. You said family was the most important thing in life, that you hoped your kids would always feel comfortable coming to you the way you could always come to me. Michael's jaw tightened. I remember all of that. But Mom, things change when you get married. Your priorities have to shift. I'm not asking to be your top priority, I said. I'm asking to remain a priority at all. I'm asking not to be treated like an inconvenience, or a burden, or someone whose feelings don't matter. Your feelings do matter, he said, but his tone was distant, automatic. It's just that Vanessa's feelings matter too, and right now, she needs things to be calm and predictable. What about my feelings, Michael? What about the fact that I'm being systematically cut out of your life? What about the fact that I found out I was going to be a grandmother from a neighbor at the grocery store? For the first time since he'd arrived, Michael looked genuinely uncomfortable. That wasn't how we planned it. We were going to tell you. When? After the baby was born. After you'd had time to adjust to the idea without dealing with my expectations and opinions. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. I felt my careful composure starting to crack. Michael, I'm your mother. I love you more than my own life. I've supported you through every challenge, celebrated every success, and been there for you whenever you needed me. And now I'm being told that my presence in your life is a source of stress that needs to be managed and minimized. How exactly am I supposed to make that easier? Michael looked down at his hands. I don't know, Mom. I just know that I'm caught in the middle here, and it's tearing me apart. Vanessa feels like you don't respect her or trust her judgment. She thinks you see her as competition instead of as my partner. Do you see her as my competition? No, of course not, but she does. And that's creating problems in my marriage. So the solution is to eliminate the competition by cutting me out. The solution is to find a balance that works for everyone, except the balance you're describing isn't a balance at all. It's me accepting whatever scraps of access Vanessa deems appropriate while she gets to dictate the terms of my relationship with my own son. Michael stood up abruptly. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Mom. You're making this about winning and losing instead of about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, or what's easiest for Vanessa? They're the same thing right now, he said, and the honesty of that statement was like a slap in the face. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to value honesty and fairness, and family loyalty, and realized that somewhere along the way, he'd learned to prioritize peace over principle. He wasn't choosing Vanessa because he agreed with her perspective. He was choosing her because agreeing with her was easier than fighting for what he knew was right. Michael, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. I will always love you, no matter what. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I won't continue to participate in a dynamic where I'm expected to accept less and less access to your life, while pretending to be grateful for whatever crumbs I'm offered. What does that mean? It means I'm done begging for invitations to events I used to host. I'm done apologizing for caring about your well-being. I'm done walking on eggshells around Vanessa's sensitivities, while my own feelings are treated as irrelevant. Michael's face went pale. Mom, you're not saying you're going to cut us off, are you? The question revealed everything I needed to know about how this situation had been framed in their household. I was the unstable one, the one who might do something dramatic and unreasonable. Vanessa had positioned herself as the rational, patient victim, who was trying to manage my inappropriate behavior, while I was cast as the potential threat who might lash out if I didn't get my way. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm simply choosing not to chase after people who've made it clear they'd prefer me to keep my distance. But what about the baby? What about being a grandmother? What about it, Michael? You've already established that Vanessa gets to decide how much involvement I'm allowed to have in your lives. She gets to determine when I find out about major news, which holidays I'm included in, how often we see each other, and what topics of conversation are appropriate. So tell me, what kind of grandmother am I actually going to be allowed to be? Michael didn't answer, probably because we both knew the answer. I would be allowed to be the kind of grandmother who showed up when invited, stayed in the background when present, and never expressed opinions or preferences that might conflict with Vanessa's vision of how things should be done. That's what I thought, I said when the silence stretched too long. So no, I'm not cutting you off, but I'm also not going to pretend that the relationship you're offering me is enough. I'm not going to act grateful for being tolerated when I used to be welcome. Mom, I don't want things to be like this. Then change them. I can't. My marriage has to come first. Your marriage should come first. I agreed. But that doesn't mean everyone else in your life has to disappear. Healthy marriages make room for extended family relationships. They don't require you to choose between your wife and everyone else you've ever loved. Vanessa doesn't see it that way. No, she doesn't. And that's a problem, Michael. Not just for me, but for you and for the family you're creating. What kind of message does it send to your child when they see that love comes with conditions, that family relationships can be discarded whenever they become inconvenient? Michael's phone buzzed and he glanced at it quickly. I have to go. Vanessa has a doctor's appointment, and I promised I'd drive her. Of course he did. Even this conversation, this attempt to explain why I was being pushed out of his life, had to be scheduled around Vanessa's needs and preferences. There was no time or space in his life that wasn't subject to her approval. Give her my best, I said, meaning it despite everything. I hope the appointment goes well. Michael paused at the door. Mom, I really do love you. I know you do, I said. I love you too. But love isn't enough anymore, is it? It has to be the right kind of love, expressed in the right way, at the right times, according to someone else's rules. He left without responding, and I sat alone in my office trying to process what had just happened. My son had essentially come to deliver an ultimatum disguised as an explanation. Accept the reduced role Vanessa had designed for me, or lose access to him and my grandchild entirely. There was no negotiation, no compromise, no acknowledgement that my feelings or needs might be valid. But there was something else in that conversation that stuck with me, something that gave me a glimpse into the real dynamics of their relationship. Michael had looked exhausted, conflicted, like someone who was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. This wasn't a man who was happily setting boundaries with an overbearing mother. This was a man who was trapped between competing loyalties, and had chosen the path of least resistance. Vanessa had created a situation where any attempt to maintain our relationship would be framed as a betrayal of his marriage. She'd made it impossible for him to be a good son without being a bad husband, and then presented him with the choice as if it were obvious which role should take priority. The manipulation was brilliant, really. She'd never directly told him to choose between us. Instead, she'd created constant conflict around our relationship, made every interaction with me a source of stress in their marriage, and then stepped back and let him draw the logical conclusion. If being close to his mother caused problems with his wife, then the solution was to be less close to his mother. What she probably hadn't counted on was that Michael wasn't actually comfortable with this outcome. The guilt and conflict I'd seen in his face weren't the emotions of someone who was confident in his choices. They were the emotions of someone who knew he was doing something wrong but felt powerless to change course. That gave me hope, but it also gave me a strategy. Instead of continuing to fight for a place in their lives, instead of trying to prove that I deserved better treatment, I would simply step back and let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. Let them see what it felt like to navigate parenthood without the support system they were so eager to reject. I started small. When Michael texted me a few days later asking if I could recommend a good pediatrician, I politely referred him to his insurance company's website. When Vanessa called the following week asking if I knew anything about baby-proofing older homes, I suggested she consult a professional service. When Michael mentioned that they were struggling to find reliable childcare options,
I offered to put them in touch with a nanny agency rather than volunteering my own services. Each interaction was friendly and helpful, but impersonal. I wasn't refusing to assist them, but I also wasn't offering the kind of hands-on, emotionally invested support I would have provided before. If they wanted to be independent, then they could be truly independent. If they wanted to make decisions without my input, then they could also implement those decisions without my labor. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Michael started calling more frequently, not to share news or maintain our relationship, but to ask questions that he'd never needed to ask before. How long should a pregnant woman wait between doctor's appointments? What kind of crib mattress was safe? Did I know anything about postpartum depression symptoms? These weren't conversations between a son and his mother. They were consultations with someone who had experience he needed to access. And while I answered his questions politely and accurately, I didn't offer additional information or volunteer to become more involved in their preparations. The real test came about 6 weeks after our conversation at my office. Michael called on a Saturday morning, and I could hear stress and exhaustion in his voice before he even explained what was wrong. "Mom, I need to ask you a huge favor," he said. "Vanessa woke up with really bad stomach pains, and we're at the emergency room. The doctors think it might be some kind of stomach bug, but they want to keep her for observation because of the pregnancy. I've been here since 4 in the morning and I need to go home to get some things for her, but I don't want to leave her alone." In the past, I would have dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. I would have sat with Vanessa while Michael ran errands, brought them both coffee and snacks, stayed as long as they needed me, and probably insisted on taking care of any household tasks that had been neglected during the crisis. Instead, I said, "That sounds really stressful. I hope she's okay." There was a pause. "Mom, I was wondering if you could come sit with her while I run home. It would just be for an hour or two." "Oh," I said, as if the idea hadn't occurred to me. "I'm sorry, Michael, but I have appointments scheduled all day. You might want to call one of Vanessa's friends or family members." Another pause, longer this time. "Her family is all in California, and most of her friends don't drive." "That's tough. Maybe you could ask the nurses if there's a volunteer program or something. I know some hospitals have people who can sit with patients during situations like this." "Mom," Michael said, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice, "are you seriously not going to come?" "It's not that I don't want to help," I said calmly. "It's just that I have commitments I can't break. I'm sure you'll figure something out. But this is an emergency. I understand that, and I'm sorry you're dealing with this stress, but Michael, you and Vanessa have made it very clear that you need to handle things independently. This seems like exactly the kind of situation where that independence would be valuable." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Michael said, "Mom, I can't believe you're doing this." "Doing what?" "Respecting the boundaries you've established, allowing you to manage your own crisis without interference from extended family. This is different." "How is it different?" "Because we need help." "But Michael, accepting help from me would mean acknowledging that I'm not actually the intrusive burden you've made me out to be. It would mean admitting that family support is valuable, even when it comes with the occasional opinion or suggestion you don't want to hear." "Mom, please." "I'm scared and Vanessa is scared and I just need my mom right now." The naked vulnerability in his voice almost broke my resolve. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to drop everything and rush to that hospital, to wrap my son in my arms and tell him everything would be okay. But I also knew that if I did that, nothing would change. Vanessa would accept my help during the crisis and then go right back to treating me like an inconvenience once it was over. "I understand that you're scared," I said gently, "but you've spent the last several months establishing that what you need from me is distance and independence. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. Not like this. There's no other way to give you independence except to actually let you be independent. You can't have it both ways, Michael. You can't push me away when things are going well and then expect me to rush in whenever there's a problem."
"But you're my mom." "Yes, I am. And as your mom, I love you enough to respect the choices you've made about how you want our relationship to work. You and Vanessa have decided that you don't need my day-to-day involvement in your lives. This is what that looks like." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if something's really wrong? What if something happens to the baby?" My heart clenched. "Then you'll handle it together. Like the independent adults you are, you'll make the necessary decisions, deal with whatever consequences arise, and move forward with your lives. Isn't that what you wanted? I wanted boundaries, not abandonment. I'm not abandoning you. I'm right here, available to talk whenever you need to, but I'm not going to continue pretending that I'm essential to your life when you've made it clear that I'm not. After Michael hung up, I sat in my living room staring at my phone and questioning everything I'd just done. Was I being cruel? Was I punishing my son for his wife's behavior? Was I letting my own hurt feelings override my natural instinct to help my child during a difficult time? But then, I thought about the pattern we'd established over the past few months. Every time there was a crisis or a need, I was expected to drop everything and provide whatever support was required. But every time things calmed down, I was expected to step back and accept whatever minimal role they decided was appropriate for me. It was a pattern that benefited them enormously while leaving me feeling used and undervalued. They got the security of knowing I would always be there when they needed me, but they also got the freedom to exclude me from their lives whenever my presence became inconvenient. Breaking that pattern required me to demonstrate that independence has costs as well as benefits. If they wanted to make decisions without my input, they also had to implement those decisions without my labor. If they wanted to minimize my role in their daily lives, they had to accept that my role during emergencies would be minimized as well. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about establishing a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. They could still call me when they needed help, but they couldn't expect me to always say yes, especially when they'd made it clear that my help came with emotional costs they weren't willing to pay. The phone rang again about 2 hours later. This time it was Vanessa. "Sue," she said, and her voice was tight with what sounded like a mixture of pain and anger. "Michael told me you won't come to the hospital." "That's correct," I said. "I hope you're feeling better." "I'm not feeling better. I'm scared and sick, and my husband is falling apart because his mother won't help us when we need her." "Vanessa, I understand that this is a difficult situation, but you and Michael have worked very hard to establish that you don't need my help, that my involvement in your lives is more of a burden than a benefit. I'm simply respecting those boundaries. This is different, and you know it." "How is it different?" "Because this is an emergency." "So emergencies are the exception to the independence you've been insisting on." "Sue, I'm 24 weeks pregnant, sitting in a hospital room, not knowing if my baby is okay. This isn't the time for whatever point you're trying to make." The accusation that I was making a point rather than responding to their explicit requests for distance stung, but it also clarified something important for me. In Vanessa's mind, my value was purely utilitarian. I was useful during emergencies and inconvenient during normal times, and she couldn't understand why I wouldn't simply accept that role. "Vanessa," I said, "I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mike. Do you remember the conversation we had on his birthday, about boundaries and independence?" "Of course I remember. Do you remember telling me that you and Michael needed space to figure out how to be adults and parents without feeling monitored or managed?" "Yes, but do you remember saying that what you needed from me was less involvement, fewer phone calls, less frequent visits, and more respect for your autonomy as a married couple?" "Yes, but this is an emergency." "So your position is that I should be unavailable when you don't need me and immediately available when you do." "My position is that family helps family during emergencies, regardless of whatever other issues might exist." "But Vanessa, you've spent months explaining to me that I'm not really family in the way I thought I was. You've told me that I'm extended family, that my role in your lives needs to be limited and managed, that my opinions and preferences are secondary to your needs as a nuclear unit." "I never said you weren't family. You said that Michael's primary obligation was to you and your child, and that everyone else, including parents, was secondary. You said that my involvement in your lives was suffocating and intrusive. You said that healthy independence meant making your own decisions without outside influence. But I didn't mean during emergencies." "Then what did you mean? When exactly is my help welcome, And when is it intrusive? What are the rules here, Vanessa? Because from my perspective, it seems like the rule is that I'm supposed to be available whenever you decide you need me, but otherwise stay out of your way. There was a long silence. Then Vanessa said, "Fine, if this is how you want to play it, then fine. But don't expect things to go back to normal after this." "Things were never normal," I said. "Normal would be me being included in your lives in a meaningful way, being told about important news when it happens, being valued as a source of support and wisdom rather than treated like an obligation you have to manage. And because you're not getting what you want, you're willing to abandon us during a medical emergency. I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for, the chance to handle your own problems without interference from extended family." Vanessa hung up without saying goodbye, and I knew that I had just crossed a line from which there might be no return, but I also knew that the line had been drawn by them, not by me. They had created a relationship dynamic where my value was conditional, and my role was subject to their approval, and then they'd expressed surprise when I stopped playing by those rules. The rest of that day was agony. I kept checking my phone, wondering if I would get updates about Vanessa's condition, hoping that the baby was okay, questioning whether I'd made the right choice. Every motherly instinct I had was telling me to get in my car and drive to that hospital, to support my son and his wife regardless of how they'd treated me. But I also knew that if I did that, nothing would fundamentally change. They would accept my help during this crisis, probably even be grateful for it, and then we would go right back to the same pattern of conditional inclusion and managed access that had been making me miserable for months. Breaking a dysfunctional pattern requires someone to be willing to tolerate short-term discomfort for the sake of long-term change. And if Michael and Vanessa were going to learn that relationships require mutual respect and consideration, then someone had to be willing to demonstrate what happens when those elements are missing. Late that evening, Michael called with an update. Vanessa was going to be fine. The stomach pains had been caused by a severe case of food poisoning, probably from some questionable seafood they'd eaten the night before. The baby was healthy and unaffected. They were being discharged the next morning. "I'm so glad everything is okay," I said, and I meant it completely. "Yeah," Michael said, but his voice was flat, distant. "We managed to get through it. I never doubted that you would." "Mom, I need you to know that what you did today really hurt. It hurt both of us. I'm sorry that you were hurt. That wasn't my intention." "Then why did you do it?" "Because, Michael, relationships are reciprocal. They require both people to invest, to prioritize each other's needs, to make sacrifices when necessary. For months I've been the only one investing in our relationship. I've been accommodating your boundaries, respecting Vanessa's preferences, adjusting my expectations to match your availability. And today you decided to stop. Today I decided to let you experience what it feels like when the investment only goes one way." Michael was quiet for a moment. "So this was some kind of lesson? This was me treating you the same way you've been treating me, with conditional availability, limited emotional investment, and the understanding that other priorities come first. That's not how we've been treating you, isn't it? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in a decision that affected our family? When was the last time you prioritized my feelings or needs over Vanessa's preferences?" Another silence. "It's not that simple, Mom." "It's exactly that simple. You can't have a close, supportive relationship with someone while simultaneously keeping them at arm's length. You can't expect unconditional love while offering only conditional access." "So what are you saying? That things are just going to be different now?" "I'm saying that I'm done being the only person in this relationship who's willing to make sacrifices. I'm done accepting whatever scraps of attention and affection you're willing to offer while pretending to be grateful for them. And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for your relationship with your grandchild?" "I don't know, Michael. That depends on what kind of relationship you and Vanessa are willing to offer. If you want me to be a distant formal presence who shows up for major holidays and otherwise stays out of your way, then I can do that. If you want me to be an emergency contact who's available during crises but otherwise uninvolved in your daily lives, I can do that too. And if we want something in between, then you'll need to demonstrate that you value me enough to invest in our relationship even when it's not convenient, even when it requires you to consider my needs, alongside Vanessa's preferences,
even when it means making choices that prioritize family connections over complete independence. That's a lot to ask. It's the bare minimum of what a healthy family relationship requires. And Michael, if it seems like a lot to ask, then maybe that tells you something about how unhealthy our current dynamic has become. After we hung up, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd spoken my truth clearly and completely. I'd stopped trying to minimize my own needs to make their choices seem reasonable. I'd stopped accepting responsibility for the dysfunction in our relationship while they continued to create it. Whether this confrontation would lead to positive change or permanent estrangement remained to be seen, but at least now we were all operating with a clear understanding of where things stood. They knew what I needed from our relationship, and they knew what would happen if those needs continued to be ignored. The ball was in their court. The silence that followed the hospital incident lasted 3 weeks. No calls, no texts, no attempts at communication from either Michael or Vanessa. At first, I told myself this was exactly what I'd expected, that they were processing what had happened, and hopefully reconsidering the dynamic they'd created. But as the days stretched on, I began to wonder if I'd finally pushed them too far, if my refusal to rush to their rescue had permanently severed whatever fragile connection we'd maintained. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in early December, my doorbell rang. I was in my kitchen having coffee and reading real estate listings when I heard the sound. Through the front window, I could see Michael's car in my driveway, and my heart started racing. He was alone, which seemed significant somehow. I opened the door to find my son looking haggard and exhausted. His hair was uncombed, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 32 years. For a moment he looked exactly like the little boy who used to show up at my bedroom door after having nightmares, seeking comfort and reassurance. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Of course. I led him to the living room, the same room where we'd had countless conversations over the years, where I'd helped him with homework, and listened to his teenage heartbreaks, and celebrated his college acceptance. But today the familiar space felt charged with tension, like we were meeting as strangers rather than mother and son. Michael sat heavily on the couch and put his head in his hands. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." "About what?" "About everything. About Vanessa. About us. About this whole mess I've created." He looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and defeated. "I think I've made a terrible mistake." I felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. "What kind of mistake?" "I think I've let Vanessa convince me that you were the problem when really the problem is that I've been too weak to stand up for what I know is right." He leaned back against the couch cushions and stared at the ceiling. "She's been escalating things since the hospital incident, making demands about Christmas, about the baby shower, about every aspect of our future that involves family." "What kind of demands?" "She wants me to tell you that you're not invited to the baby shower. She says it should just be her friends and her sister who's flying in from California. When I suggested that maybe you could come too, she said I was choosing my mother over my wife again." The casual cruelty of being excluded from my own grandchild's baby shower hit me like a physical blow, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that was unreasonable, that you're the baby's grandmother and you should be included in these celebrations." Michael rubbed his temples like he had a headache. "She said if I insisted on inviting you, she would cancel the whole shower. So she's willing to give up celebrating her pregnancy rather than spend a few hours in my company." "It's not really about the shower, Mom. It's about control. She wants to prove that she can make these decisions unilaterally, that her preferences will always win out over anyone else's needs or feelings." This was the first time Michael had explicitly acknowledged what I'd been seeing for months, that Vanessa's behavior wasn't about reasonable boundaries, but about establishing dominance. She wasn't trying to create healthy space for their marriage. She was trying to ensure that her voice was the only one that mattered in their household. "What else has she said?" Michael sighed deeply. "She wants me to tell you that you can't be in the delivery room when the baby is born. She says it's too intimate, too personal, that it should just be the two of us." When I mentioned that my grandmother was in the room when I was born, and that it's a family tradition, she said our family doesn't have to follow the same traditions as previous generations. "And she wants to spend it alone, just the two of us. No extended family, no traditions, no obligations to anyone else's expectations. Michael's voice was getting tighter with each revelation. She said, if we give in to family pressure this year, we'll be setting a precedent that will haunt us for the rest of our marriage. Family pressure. Holiday traditions had become family pressure. Wanting to spend Christmas with my son and his pregnant wife had become an unreasonable demand that would somehow damage their relationship. Michael, can I ask you something? Sure. When you think about the family you want to create with this baby, what does it look like? Do you want your child to grow up knowing their extended family? Do you want them to have memories of holiday gatherings and birthday celebrations and Sunday dinners? Do you want them to feel connected to something larger than just their immediate household? Michael's face crumpled slightly. Of course I do. I loved growing up with that sense of family, that feeling of belonging to something bigger. Some of my best memories are from holidays here, from family gatherings where everyone was together. Then how are you going to create that for your child if you're systematically cutting ties with the family that could provide it? I don't know. Vanessa says we'll create our own traditions, our own sense of family, without all the baggage and expectations that come with extended family relationships. What baggage? What expectations? The obligation to include people in decisions that should be private. The pressure to maintain relationships even when they're not working. The guilt that comes from disappointing people who feel entitled to access to your life. Again, I heard Vanessa's language coming out of my son's mouth. In her version of family dynamics, love was entitlement, support was pressure, and wanting to be included was a form of manipulation. Michael, do you feel like I've been entitled to access to your life? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I think you've been hurt and confused by being pushed away, and maybe you've made some mistakes in how you've responded to that. But entitled? No, you've never acted like you were entitled to anything. Do you think the pressure you feel comes from me, or from trying to navigate between what you know is right and what Vanessa wants you to do? Another pause. From trying to navigate, he admitted. Mom, I know this is going to sound terrible, but sometimes I feel like I'm living with a stranger. The woman I married wanted to get to know you better, wanted to be part of our family traditions, talked about how important family was to her. This woman who's replaced her seems to see every family connection as a threat. What do you think changed? I think the pregnancy changed everything. Suddenly she started seeing you as competition for the baby's attention and affection. She started interpreting every offer of help as an attempt to undermine her authority as a mother. She became convinced that if we didn't establish strict boundaries now, you would take over our parenting decisions. Have I ever tried to take over your decisions? No. You've offered advice when asked, and maybe sometimes when not asked, but you've never tried to override our choices or make us feel incompetent. Then where is this fear coming from? Michael shook his head. I think it's coming from her own family situation. Her parents got divorced when she was 12, and afterward there was this horrible custody battle, where the grandparents on both sides tried to use Vanessa and her sister as weapons against each other. She's told me stories about being caught in the middle of adult conflicts, about feeling like she never knew who to trust or what agenda people had when they were nice to her. This was the first real insight I'd gotten into Vanessa's behavior, and it helped explain some of the intensity of her reactions. If she'd grown up in a family where love was conditional, and relationships were manipulative, then she might genuinely see normal family closeness as threatening. That's really sad, I said, and I meant it. But Michael, just because Vanessa had terrible experiences with extended family doesn't mean that all extended family relationships are terrible. It doesn't mean she gets to isolate you from healthy family connections because she's afraid they might turn toxic. I know that, but I don't know how to help her see the difference between your family and her family. In her mind, all of this feels the same: adults making demands, setting expectations, trying to control outcomes. What do you think would happen if you stood up to her? If you said that you want me at the baby shower, that you want to spend Christmas with family, that you want your child to know their grandmother? Michael's face went pale. I don't know. She's already threatened to leave me once during this whole thing. She said if I couldn't prioritize our marriage over other relationships, then maybe we weren't compatible after all. The manipulation was even worse than I'd realized. Vanessa wasn't just isolating Michael from his family, She was threatening to take his child away if he didn't comply with her demands. She'd created a situation where any attempt to maintain family relationships was framed as a betrayal of his marriage and a threat to his future as a father. Michael, that's not how healthy marriages work. Partners don't threaten to leave each other over disagreements about family relationships. They work together to find compromises that respect everyone's needs. I know that too, but Mom, I'm terrified of losing her. Not just because I love her, but because I can't stand the thought of my child growing up in a broken home the way she did. I want this marriage to work, even if it means making sacrifices I'm not comfortable with. What if the sacrifices you're making now ensure that your marriage will never actually work? What if by giving in to her control issues, you're enabling behavior that will eventually destroy your relationship anyway? What do you mean? I mean that someone who threatens to leave every time they don't get their way isn't someone who's committed to making a marriage work. Someone who demands that their partner choose between them and everyone else in their life isn't someone who understands what partnership means. Michael looked stricken. Are you saying I should leave her? I'm saying you should consider whether the relationship you're trying so hard to preserve is actually worth preserving. Are you happy, Michael? Do you feel supported and valued? Do you feel like you can be yourself? Or are you constantly walking on eggshells trying not to upset her? I'm walking on eggshells, he admitted quietly, all the time. I second guess everything I say, everything I do, because I never know what's going to set her off. I can't mention you without triggering a fight. I can't talk about family traditions without being accused of prioritizing the past over our future. I can't even suggest that we need to find compromises without being told that I'm not committed to our marriage. That sounds exhausting. It is. And the worst part is that I'm starting to question my own instincts about everything. She's so sure that she's right, so confident in her perspective, that I've started wondering if maybe I am being unreasonable for wanting to maintain family relationships. Michael, listen to me very carefully. Wanting to maintain relationships with people who love you is not unreasonable. Wanting your child to know their grandparents is not unreasonable. Wanting to spend holidays with family is not unreasonable. The fact that Vanessa has convinced you to question these basic human desires is deeply concerning. But what if she's right about some of it? What if I have been too dependent on you, too willing to prioritize your feelings over hers? Have you been too dependent on? Michael thought about this seriously. No, I call you maybe twice a week. I see you a couple of times a month. I ask for your advice sometimes, but I don't always follow it. That's not dependence. That's just normal family closeness. And have you been prioritizing my feelings over hers? No, I've been trying to find ways to include both of you in our lives, to make everyone feel valued and respected, but every attempt at compromise has been interpreted as choosing you over her, because she's not interested in compromise, she's interested in win. We sat in silence for a few minutes while Michael processed this. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the recognition that what I was saying was true, warring with his fear of the consequences of acting on that recognition. Mom, if I stand up to her, if I insist on maintaining our relationship and including you in the baby's life, she might actually leave me. She might. But Michael, if she would leave you for wanting to maintain a relationship with your mother, then she was never really committed to making your marriage work in the first place. But what about the baby? What if I lose access to my own child? What kind of access do you think you'll have if you stay with someone who's already demonstrated that she's willing to use your child as leverage to control your behavior? Do you think this pattern is going to get better after the baby is born or worse? Michael's face went white as the implications of this sank in.
If she's this controlling about our relationship with you, she'll probably be even more controlling about our parenting decisions. And if you establish now that her threats work, that she can get her way by threatening to leave or take the baby away, what do you think will happen the next time you disagree about something important? She'll make the same threats. Exactly. You'll spend the rest of your marriage being held hostage by someone who's willing to blow up your family to get her way. Michael put his head back in his hands. I feel like I'm trapped. If I give in to her demands, I lose you and probably my own sense of self. If I stand up to her, I might lose my wife and child. Or, I said gently, if you stand up to her, you might discover that she's not as willing to follow through on her threats as she wants you to believe. She might actually respect you more for having boundaries of your own. You think she's bluffing? I think she's learned that threatening to leave is an effective way to control your behavior, and she'll keep using that strategy as long as it works. But I also think that someone who's 7 months pregnant and financially dependent on your income might not be as eager to actually leave as she wants you to believe. Michael looked up sharply. She's not financially dependent on me. She has her own job. I thought she was taking extended maternity leave after the baby is born. She is, but that doesn't make her dependent. Michael, have you looked at your finances lately? Do you know how much her maternity leave is going to cost you? Do you know what your household expenses will be once you're supporting a family of 3 on one income? I haven't really calculated it all out. We've been too focused on other things. Maybe you should, because someone who's about to become economically vulnerable might be more motivated to make compromises than someone who has complete financial independence. This clearly hadn't occurred to Michael, and I could see him starting to think through the practical implications of their situation. The power dynamic he thought he was dealing with might be very different from the actual power dynamic. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. If I do stand up to her, if I insist that things have to change, will you be willing to work with us on finding a middle ground? I know you've been hurt by how we've treated you, and you have every right to be angry. But if we can figure out a way to make this work, would you be open to that? What would a middle ground look like? I don't know yet. Maybe family dinners once a month instead of once a week, maybe being included in major celebrations, but giving you guys space for smaller occasions. Maybe finding ways for you to be involved with the baby that don't make Vanessa feel like her authority is being undermined. And what would you need from Vanessa to make that work? I'd need her to stop threatening to leave every time we have a disagreement. I'd need her to acknowledge that you're not the enemy, that you're someone who loves our family and wants to support us. I'd need her to be willing to actually compromise instead of just demanding that everyone else adjust to her preferences. Those seem like reasonable requirements for any healthy relationship. Do you think she'll be willing to meet them? I don't know, Mike, but I think you're going to find out a lot about who she really is, and what she's really committed to when you start setting boundaries of your own. What if she really does leave? Then you'll know that she was never the partner you thought she was, and you'll be free to build the kind of life and family you actually want. It will be painful, but it will also be honest. Michael was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the bare trees in my backyard. I'm scared, Mom. I know you are, but staying in a relationship that requires you to sacrifice your integrity and your family connections isn't going to make you any happier in the long run. What if I'm wrong about all of this? What if Vanessa really is just trying to establish healthy boundaries, and I'm being manipulated by my overbearing mother? I smiled sadly. Michael, do you feel overbearing to you? No, you feel like safety and unconditional love, and someone who wants the best for me, even when it's not the easiest thing for you. Then trust that feeling. Trust what you know about me, about our relationship, about the family you grew up in. Don't let someone else's fear and insecurity convince you to doubt what you know to be true. Michael stood up and walked to the window. I need to think about this. I need to figure out how to have this conversation with Vanessa without it turning into World War III. Take all the time you need, but Michael, the conversation has to happen. You can't keep living in a marriage where your wife gets to dictate the terms of every other relationship in your life. I know. I just need to find the courage to actually do it. You'll find you're stronger than you think you are. After Michael left, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. On one hand, he'd finally acknowledged what was really happening in his marriage, finally recognized that Vanessa's behavior was controlling rather than reasonable. On the other hand, I knew that the confrontation he was planning could go very badly very quickly, but I also knew that this conversation was inevitable. The dynamic they'd established wasn't sustainable, and it was only going to get worse once the baby arrived. Better for Michael to address it now while he still had some leverage, than to wait until he was completely trapped by parenthood and financial obligation. 3 days later, Michael called me at work. His voice was shaky, and I could tell immediately that the conversation with Vanessa had not gone well. Mom, can you meet me somewhere? I need to talk to you, but I can't come to the house right now. Of course. Where do you want to meet? There's a coffee shop on Maple Street near the library. Can you be there in an hour? I'll be there. When I arrived at the coffee shop, I found Michael sitting in a corner booth, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. He looked even worse than he had 3 days earlier. Pale, exhausted, and defeated. What happened? I asked as I sat down across from him. I tried to talk to her about the baby shower, about Christmas, about finding ways to include you in our lives that didn't feel threatening to her. Michael's voice was flat, emotionless. She listened for about 5 minutes, and then she completely lost it. What did she say? She said I was being manipulated by you, that you'd obviously gotten to me during my visit and convinced me to choose you over her. She said if I couldn't see that you were trying to destroy our marriage, then I was either stupid or deliberately cruel. The fact that Vanessa had turned my conversation with Michael into evidence of manipulation was both predictable and deeply disturbing. She couldn't allow for the possibility that he'd reached his own conclusions about their relationship. It had to be my fault. How did you respond? I told her that wasn't true, that I'd reached these conclusions on my own because I could see how unhappy I'd become trying to meet her impossible standards. I told her that I needed our marriage to have room for other relationships, including my relationship with you. And then what happened? She started crying and saying that I was abandoning her just like everyone else in her life had. She said she thought I was different, that I understood how important it was to put our relationship first. But now she could see that I was just like every other man who promised to love her and then chose someone else. The emotional manipulation was breathtaking. Instead of addressing the substance of Michael's concerns, Vanessa had made herself the victim of his reasonable requests for compromise. Did you point out that wanting to maintain a relationship with my mother isn't the same as choosing someone else over her? I tried to, but she said that any energy I spent on other relationships was energy I wasn't spending on her and the baby. She said that if I really loved her, if I really wanted our marriage to work, I would be willing to make the sacrifice of limiting contact with you. So she's defining love as isolation, apparently, and when I said that didn't seem healthy to me, she said I was calling her unhealthy, that I was judging her for having different needs than other people. What did you say to that? I said that her needs seemed to require me to give up everyone and everything that was important to me before I met her. I said that wasn't a need, it was a demand. How did she respond? Michael's face crumpled. She said that if I felt that way, if I thought her needs were unreasonable demands, then maybe we should consider whether we were compatible after all. She said maybe she should go stay with her sister in California for a while, give me time to think about what I really wanted. She's 7 months pregnant, and she's threatening to move across the country. She's already called her sister. She's already looked into flights. She said she could be gone by the weekend if that's what I wanted. And what did you tell her? I panicked. I begged her not to leave, promised we could work something out, said I didn't want to break up our family. Michael's voice broke. I told her I would do whatever she needed me to do. My heart sank. So you backed down. I backed down completely. I told her she was right, that I needed to prioritize our relationship over all other relationships. I promised that I would talk to you about limiting contact until after the baby is born, and we've had time to adjust to being parents. And how did that feel? Like I was signing my own death warrant, like I was agreeing to become someone I don't recognize or respect. Michael looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I know I'm disappointing you again. I know I'm choosing the easy path instead of the right path. You're not disappointing me, Michael, you're disappointing yourself, and that's much worse. I don't know how to stand up to her when she threatens to leave. The thought of losing my child, of only seeing them on weekends and holidays, is unbearable. But you're going to lose yourself if you stay, and eventually you'll lose your child anyway, because Vanessa will teach them that love requires complete submission to her will. What do you mean? I mean that if you model a relationship where one person gets to make all the rules and the other person has to obey them, that's what your child will think marriage is supposed to look like. If you teach them that family relationships are optional and can be discarded whenever they become inconvenient, that's how they'll treat you when you become inconvenient. Michael stared at me in horror. I never thought about it that way. Think about it now. What kind of relationship do you want to model for your child? What kind of family dynamics do you want them to consider normal? I want them to see parents who respect each other, who work through disagreements without threats or ultimatums, who maintain connections with extended family because they understand that love isn't a zero-sum game. Then you know what you have to do. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I call her bluff? What if I tell her that I want you at the baby shower and Christmas dinner? And if she can't handle that, then maybe she should go to California. What if you do? What if she actually leaves? Then you'll know that she was never committed to making your marriage work, and you'll be free to build the kind of life you actually want for yourself and your child. But I'll be a single father. You'll be a father who has integrity. You'll be a father who teaches your child that family relationships matter, that love doesn't require you to surrender your identity, that healthy relationships involve compromise from both people. And if she comes back, if she realizes that I'm serious and decides to work with me instead of against me, then you'll have a real marriage instead of a hostage situation. You'll have a partner instead of a captor." Michael nodded slowly. "I think I need to stop being afraid of losing something that's already making me miserable." "That sounds like wisdom. Will you help me figure out how to have this conversation with her? I want to do it right. I want to be firm but not cruel, clear but not ultimatum-like." "Of course I'll help you, but Michael, you need to be prepared for any outcome. She might surprise you and be willing to compromise, or she might follow through on her threats. Either way, you'll be better off than you are now." "Why is that?" "Because you'll finally know who you're really married to." 2 weeks passed before Michael called again. When he did, his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in months: calm, resolved, almost peaceful. "Mom, I did it. I had the conversation with Vanessa." "How did it go?" "Exactly like we thought it would, but this time I was ready for it. I felt my heart rate spike." "Tell me everything." "I sat her down last night and told her that I'd made some decisions about our family. I said that you would be invited to the baby shower, that we would be spending Christmas with you, and that I expected her to find a way to make peace with having you in our lives." "What was her immediate reaction?" "She got very still and quiet, which is usually a bad sign. Then she said, 'I thought we already discussed this. I thought you understood that I can't handle the stress of dealing with your mother right now, and you said—' I said that my understanding was that she couldn't handle the stress of dealing with anyone who might have opinions or needs that conflicted with hers, and that wasn't the same thing as specifically having a problem with you." I was impressed by how clearly Michael had articulated the real issue. He wasn't just defending me, he was calling out the broader pattern of Vanessa's behavior. "How did she respond to that?" "She tried the usual tactic. First she cried and said I was being cruel, that I knew how vulnerable she was right now with the pregnancy and how much she needed my support. When that didn't work, she got angry and accused me of letting you manipulate me into destroying our marriage." "But you held firm?" "I held firm. I told her that the only person trying to manipulate anyone was her, and that I was done pretending her ultimatums were reasonable requests." "What happened next?" "She played her trump card. She said that if I insisted on prioritizing my mother over my wife and unborn child, then she would have no choice but to protect herself and the baby by leaving." This was the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Either Michael would cave under the pressure like he had before, or he would finally call her bluff and discover what she was really made of. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that was her choice to make, but that I wouldn't be blackmailed into cutting off my family anymore. I said that if she wanted to leave our marriage, rather than learn to coexist with my mother, then I would help her pack." I almost dropped the phone. "You said that?" "I said exactly that." "And Mom?" The look on her face was incredible. For the first time since I've known her, Vanessa was speechless. She just stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What did she do then?" She started backtracking immediately. Suddenly it wasn't about leaving anymore. It was about finding compromises that could work for everyone. She said maybe she'd been hasty. Maybe there were ways to include you that wouldn't feel so overwhelming to her. So she was bluffing. Completely bluff. The minute she realized that her threats weren't going to work anymore, she completely changed her tune. It was like watching someone deflate. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, angry. Angry that I let myself be controlled by empty threats for so long. Angry that I almost destroyed my relationship with you,
because I was afraid of consequences that were never going to happen, but also relieved. Incredibly relieved. It's like I can breathe again. I feel like myself for the first time in months. I felt a surge of pride in my son that was almost overwhelming. Standing up to manipulation takes enormous courage, especially when you're not sure what the outcome will be. Michael had found that courage, and it had changed everything. So what happens now? What did you two agree on? We're still working out the details, but the framework is that you'll be included in major family events and celebrations. You'll be at the baby shower, Christmas dinner, and definitely in the delivery room, if you want to. We'll do family dinners maybe twice a month instead of weekly, and Vanessa gets to have some events that are just her friends or just us. That sounds very reasonable. It is reasonable. And the crazy thing is, now that Vanessa isn't fighting the idea of including you, she's actually starting to come up with suggestions for how to make it work better. She mentioned wanting to plan the baby shower together with you, making sure there are activities you'd both enjoy. I think once she realized that she wasn't going to be able to eliminate you from our lives, she decided it would be better to have you as an ally than as an enemy. This was a fascinating psychological shift. Vanessa had been so focused on winning the power struggle that she'd never actually considered what it might be like to work with me instead of against me. Now that the struggle was over, she could afford to be collaborative. How are you feeling about her right now? About your marriage? Michael was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'm not sure yet. I'm glad we worked this out, but I'm also not sure I can just forget how she behaved for the past several months. The manipulation, the threats, the way she tried to isolate me from everyone I cared about, that's not something I can just pretend didn't happen. What are you going to do about that? I think we need to go to counseling. I need to understand why she thought that behavior was acceptable, and she needs to understand why it was so damaging to our relationship. If we're going to make this marriage work long term, we need to address the underlying issues that caused this problem in the first place. How does Vanessa feel about counseling? She agreed to it, which surprised me. I think she's finally starting to realize that her approach to handling conflict isn't sustainable. She can't threaten to leave every time we disagree about something. That's a good sign. Yeah, it is. But Mom, I need you to know that even if we work things out, even if our marriage gets back on track, I'm never going to let anyone treat you the way Vanessa did over the past few months. You're my mother, and you deserve respect and consideration, not just from me but from anyone who wants to be part of my life. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure this out. I'm sorry I let her convince me that wanting to maintain our relationship was somehow wrong or unhealthy. You don't need to apologize. You were in an impossible situation, and you found your way through it. That's what matters. I love you, Mom. I love you too. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of relief, vindication, and cautious optimism. The immediate crisis was over, but I knew that the real work was just beginning. Vanessa might have agreed to include me in their lives, but that didn't mean she'd genuinely accepted me as a valuable part of their family. It might just mean she'd recognized that resistance was futile, and decided to try a different strategy. But I also knew that something fundamental had shifted in Michael's relationship with both of us. He'd discovered that he could stand up for what he believed was right, even when it required confronting someone he loved. He'd learned that healthy relationships don't require you to sacrifice your integrity or abandon your other commitments. Most importantly, he'd realized that real love doesn't come with threats and ultimatums. The baby shower took place 3 weeks later, and it was a revelation, and how different things could be when everyone involved was actually trying to make it work. Vanessa had called me the week before to discuss the planning, and while the conversation was still somewhat formal and careful, it was also genuinely collaborative. I was thinking we could do it at your house, she said. It's bigger than our place, and it has that beautiful backyard for photos. Would you be okay with hosting? I'd be honored to host it. And maybe we could do a tea party theme. I know you have that beautiful china set that you used for Michael's graduation party. The fact that she remembered details about my house and my belongings suggested that she'd been paying more attention than I'd realized. Maybe her hostility hadn't been about genuinely disliking me, but about feeling threatened by the connection Michael and I shared. That sounds lovely. Should we split the guest list, or would you prefer to handle the invitations? Could we split it? I'll invite my friends and coworkers, and you could invite the family, friends and neighbors who've known Michael since he was little. Perfect. The day of the shower was crisp and clear, with enough warmth for people to move between the house and the backyard. I'd set up tables with white linens and centerpieces of baby's breath and pink roses, since they'd learned they were having a girl. The china gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and everything looked exactly as elegant as I'd hoped. Vanessa arrived early to help with the final setup, and I was struck by how different she seemed, still somewhat reserved but not hostile. She complimented the decorations, asked thoughtful questions about the family friends who would be attending, and even shared some funny stories about her coworkers who were coming. "Sue," she said as we were arranging the gift table, "I want you to know that I'm sorry about how I acted over the past few months. I know I made things much more difficult than they needed to be." "Thank you for saying that. I know this transition hasn't been easy for any of us. I think I was scared that there wouldn't be room for me in Michael's life if he stayed close to you. I grew up in a family where relationships were competitive, where loving one person meant having less love available for everyone else. That must have been exhausting."
It was. And I brought that same energy into our marriage without realizing it. I made Michael feel like he had to choose between us instead of figuring out how we could all support each other. This was the most insight Vanessa had ever shared about her motivations, and it helped me understand why she'd felt so threatened by normal family closeness. If her own family had operated like a zero-sum game, then my relationship with Michael would have seemed like a direct threat to her security. "I'm glad you're willing to try a different approach now." "I am. And Sue, I want you to know that I do want our daughter to know her grandmother. I want her to grow up with the kind of family stability that Michael had, the kind I always wished I had. She's going to be so loved by all of us." When the guests started arriving, I watched Vanessa navigate the social dynamics with grace and warmth. She introduced me to her friends as Michael's wonderful mother and made sure to include me in conversations about the baby, about parenting plans, about their hopes for the future. There was no hint of the territorial behavior that had characterized our interactions for months. Michael spent the afternoon moving between groups, clearly happy to see his two worlds finally coexisting peacefully. At one point I caught him watching Vanessa and me working together to serve cake to the guests, and the relief and joy on his face was unmistakable. During the gift opening, Vanessa made a point of acknowledging the thought and care that had gone into each present. When she opened the rocking chair I'd bought, the same style I'd used when Michael was a baby, she actually got teary-eyed. "This is perfect," she said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Michael told me about you rocking him to sleep in a chair just like this when he was little. I love that there's that continuity." After the guests left and we were cleaning up, Vanessa asked if she could talk to me privately. We sat on the back porch with cups of tea while Michael loaded dishes into the dishwasher. "Sue, I have a favor to ask, and I hope you'll consider it." "Of course. What is it?" "I know I have no right to ask this after how I've treated you, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to be in the delivery room when the baby comes." I was genuinely surprised. I thought you wanted it to be just you and Michael. I did think that, but I've realized that I don't actually have any family who can be there for me. My sister lives across the country, my mother and I aren't close, and my friends are all either childless or too busy with their own families. What changed your mind about wanting me there? Honestly, watching you today, seeing how you took care of everyone, how you made sure every guest felt welcomed and valued, how you anticipated needs before people even realized they had them. I think I want that energy in the room when my daughter is born. Vanessa, I would be honored to be there. Truly honored. And afterward, would you be willing to help me learn some of the practical things? I don't know anything about babies, and Michael doesn't either. We're both terrified that we're going to mess this up. Every new parent feels that way. And yes, of course I'll help you. With anything you need. I know I need to earn back your trust, and I know that's going to take time, but I'm hoping we can start fresh from here. Christmas Eve arrived 6 weeks later, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about a family celebration. Vanessa was now 8.5 months pregnant, moving slowly but still insisting on helping with the cooking. Michael had been handling most of the meal preparation, but she'd taken charge of making her grandmother's cornbread stuffing recipe, which she'd never shared with anyone before. "I want your granddaughter to know her great-grandmother's recipe," she told me, as she mixed the ingredients. "I want her to have traditions that connect her to both sides of her family." The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, turkey and fresh bread. I decorated every room with garland and white lights, and the tree in the living room was covered with ornaments that chronicled Michael's childhood. Handmade crafts from elementary school, photos from family vacations, the angel he'd made in Sunday school when he was 7. "I love seeing all of Michael's history," Vanessa said, examining a clay handprint ornament from when he was 4. "I feel like I'm getting to know the little boy he used to be. He was such a sweet child, always trying to help, always worried about whether everyone was happy. He's still like that. It's one of the things I love most about him." We'd invited Michael's grandmother, my sister Rose and her family, and a few close family friends. The table was set for 12, with candles and holly centerpieces, and the good china that had belonged to my mother. Everything felt warm and welcoming, and exactly as Christmas should feel. During dinner, Michael stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, for being part of our family, for supporting Vanessa and me as we get ready to become parents. And I especially want to thank Mom for hosting this dinner, and for being so patient with us as we figured out how to make this all work." He looked directly at me as he continued. "I realized recently that I almost made a terrible mistake. I almost let fear and misunderstanding damage the most important relationships in my life. I'm grateful that the people I love were willing to give me a second chance to get it right." Vanessa reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're both grateful, and we're both looking forward to raising our daughter in a family that knows how to work through problems and come out stronger on the other side." After dinner, we moved to the living room for gift exchange. Vanessa had bought me a beautiful photo frame engraved with Grandma, and a promise that the first professional photo of the baby would go inside it. Michael gave me a necklace with a small pendant that would eventually hold the baby's birthstone. But the gift that moved me most was one I hadn't expected. Vanessa handed me a small wrapped box and said, "This isn't really a Christmas present, it's more of an apology gift." Inside was a key ring with a single key. "It's a key to our house," she explained. "I want you to be able to come and go as you need to, especially after the baby comes. I want you to feel like you're truly part of our family, not just a visitor who has to wait for invitations." Vanessa, this means the world to me. I know I handled things badly before. I know I made you feel unwelcome and unvalued. I can't take that back, but I can make sure it never happens again. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, I need you to know something. What happened over the past few months, the way I let Vanessa treat you, the way I treated you, that's never going to happen again. I don't care if we have disagreements in the future. I don't care if there are conflicts about parenting decisions, or holiday plans, or anything else. I will never again allow anyone to make you feel like you don't belong in my life." "Michael, you don't need to." "Yes, I do need to, because I almost lost the most important relationship I have, because I was too afraid to stand up for what I knew was right. I almost let someone convince me that loving you was a betrayal of my marriage. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. You figured it out. That's what matters. I figured it out because you never gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. You could have written me off, could have decided that I wasn't worth the heartache, but you didn't. You kept loving me even when I didn't deserve it. That's what mothers do. No, that's what exceptional mothers do. And I'm going to make sure my daughter knows how lucky she is to have you as her grandmother." 3 weeks later at 2:30 in the morning, Michael called to tell me that Vanessa had gone into labor. They were at the hospital and the contractions were getting stronger. Did I want to come now, or wait until things progressed further? "I'm coming now," I said, already reaching for my clothes. The delivery room was quiet and dimly lit when I arrived. Vanessa was in bed, breathing through contractions, while Michael held her hand and murmured encouragement. She looked up when I entered and smiled. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "I was hoping you'd make it in time." For the next 6 hours I watched my son and his wife work together to bring their daughter into the world. I held Vanessa's other hand during the worst contractions,
brought ice chips and wet washcloths, and offered whatever comfort and support I could provide. When the baby finally arrived, 8 pounds, 3 ounces, with dark hair and her father's blue eyes, the first thing Vanessa said was, "Sue, would you like to hold your granddaughter?" I took that tiny perfect baby in my arms, and felt my heart expand in ways I hadn't known were possible. She was beautiful, healthy, and completely miraculous. But more than that, she represented hope. Hope for a family that had learned to work through its problems. Hope for relationships built on love rather than fear. Hope for a future where this little girl would grow up surrounded by people who had chosen to prioritize connection over control. "What's her name?" I asked. "Emma Grace," Michael said. "Emma for new beginnings, and Grace, because that's what you showed us when we didn't deserve it." I looked down at Emma Grace and whispered, "Welcome to the family, little one. You're going to be so loved." As I held my granddaughter for the first time with my son and his wife watching proudly, I realized that everything we'd been through had been worth it. The pain, the conflict, the months of uncertainty, all of it had led to this moment, to this family that was stronger, because it had been tested. Vanessa had learned that trying to control relationships through manipulation and threats only creates the very insecurity she'd been trying to avoid. Michael had learned that standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult, is essential for maintaining your integrity and self-respect. And I had learned that sometimes love requires you to step back and let people make their own mistakes, trusting that they'll eventually find their way back to what matters most. But the most important lesson we'd all learned was that family isn't about perfection or avoiding conflict. It's about working through problems together, about choosing each other again and again even when it's hard, about creating space for everyone to grow and change while maintaining the connections that make us who we are. Looking at Emma Grace sleeping peacefully in my arms, I knew that she would grow up in a family that understood these things. She would see parents who respected each other and their extended family. She would learn that love doesn't require you to give up your identity or your other relationships. She would understand that healthy families make room for disagreement while maintaining their commitment to each other. And she would always know that her grandmother loved her enough to fight for the right to be part of her life, even when that fight was painful and uncertain. As the sun rose outside the hospital windows, I handed Emma Grace back to her parents and watched them gaze at their daughter with wonder and exhaustion and overwhelming love. This was what family was supposed to look like: imperfect people choosing to love each other despite their flaws, working through their problems instead of running away from them, creating something beautiful and lasting together. The past year had tested all of us in ways we'd never expected, but we'd come through it together, stronger and more committed to each other than ever before. And now we had Emma Grace, a symbol of hope and new beginnings, a reminder that love really can conquer fear when people are brave enough to fight for what matters most. I thought about all the holidays and birthdays and milestones that lay ahead, all the opportunities to create memories and build traditions, and show Emma Grace what it means to be part of a family that chooses love over fear, connection over control, and grace over grudges. It was going to be beautiful. 6 months after Emma Grace was born, I was sitting in my kitchen reading the newspaper when my phone rang. It was Vanessa, calling during her lunch break at work. "Sue, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to ask for your advice about something." This had become our new normal. Vanessa calling me a few times a week, sometimes with questions about the baby, sometimes just to chat about her day. The transformation in our relationship was something I still marveled at regularly. "You're never bothering me. What's going on?" "Emma's been fighting her afternoon nap for the past week, and I can't figure out what's changed. She used to go down so easily, but now she screams for 20 minutes before settling down. Have you ever dealt with anything like this? It sounds like she might be ready to transition from 2 naps to 1. How old is she again?" 6.5 months. That's right around the time Michael went through the same thing. It was frustrating for about 2 weeks, and then he settled into a new routine with just 1 longer afternoon nap. "Really? So this is normal." "Completely normal. Try keeping her awake a little longer in the morning and see if she'll take 1 longer nap around noon or 1 o'clock. I'll try that. Thank you so much." I swear, sometimes I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, Every mother feels that way sometimes. You're doing a wonderful job, Vanessa. I hope so. I want to be the kind of mother Emma can be proud of. She already can, and she's lucky to have a mother who cares enough to ask for help when she needs it. After we hung up, I reflected on how much had changed in just over a year. The woman who had once seen my involvement in their lives as a threat now called me regularly for support and guidance. She'd learned that accepting help didn't make her weak or incompetent. It just made her smart enough to access the resources available to her. Michael had also continued to grow into his role as both husband and father. He'd become much better at setting boundaries when necessary while still maintaining his natural warmth and openness. The man who had once been paralyzed by conflict had learned to navigate disagreements with confidence and grace. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they functioned as a family unit. They developed a rhythm that included extended family naturally rather than viewing outside relationships as obligations or threats. Emma Grace was growing up surrounded by people who loved her, and she was thriving in that environment. The counseling they'd pursued had been tremendously helpful. Vanessa had worked through her childhood trauma around family relationships and learned to recognize when her fear was driving her behavior. Michael had developed skills for standing up for his needs and values without becoming aggressive or defensive. Together, they'd created communication patterns based on respect and genuine partnership. I'd also done my own work during this period. I'd examined my own behavior honestly and acknowledged the ways my eagerness to help had sometimes crossed into overstep. I'd learned to offer support when asked rather than assuming what people needed. I'd developed a better understanding of generational boundaries and how to maintain close relationships while respecting autonomy. The result was a family dynamic that felt healthy and sustainable. We spent time together regularly, but nobody felt obligated or trapped. We shared our opinions and concerns freely, but we also respected each other's right to make different choices. We'd created space for disagreement without letting conflict threaten the fundamental relationship. Emma Grace was walking now, and her personality was starting to emerge. She was curious and determined, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's social intuition. She loved spending time at my house, fascinated by the different textures and sounds and the way light filtered through the windows differently than at home. Last week, Vanessa had asked if I would be willing to babysit Emma one evening a week so she and Michael could have regular date nights. "We want to make sure we keep investing in our marriage," she'd explained, "and Emma loves spending time with you, so it seems like a perfect solution." The request represented such a complete reversal from where we'd started that it almost took my breath away. The woman who had once accused me of trying to interfere with their parenting was now asking me to take an active role in caring for their child. She trusted me not just with Emma's physical safety, but with maintaining the routines and boundaries they'd established. Our weekly babysitting evenings had become one of my favorite parts of the week. Emma and I had developed our own little traditions, reading books in the rocking chair, playing peekaboo with the curtains in the living room, taking walks around the neighborhood in the stroller. She was starting to say a few words, and Gamma had been among the first. Michael often stopped by my office during his lunch breaks, just to chat and catch up. We'd talk about work, about Emma's latest developments, about his plans for the future. These conversations felt natural and unforced, like they had when he was younger. The artificial distance that had characterized our relationship during the difficult period was completely gone. "Mom," he'd said during one of these visits, "I want you to know that I think about what happened last year a lot, not because I regret how things turned out, but because I learned so much about myself and about what I really value." "What did you learn?" "I learned that trying to avoid conflict by giving in to unreasonable demands doesn't actually prevent conflict. It just postpones it and makes it worse. I learned that real love doesn't ask you to choose between the people you care about. And I learned that standing up for what you believe in, even when it's scary, is the only way to maintain your integrity." Those are important lessons. They are, and I want Emma to learn them too. I want her to see parents who respect each other and their extended family. I want her to understand that healthy relationships involve compromise from everyone, not just surrender from one person. She'll learn that by watching how we all treat each other. Exactly. And Mom, I want you to know that Vanessa and I have talked about this specifically. We've agreed that we want you to be very involved in Emma's life as she grows up, not just for holidays and special occasions, but for regular ongoing support and guidance. What does that look like practically? It looks like you being someone Emma can come to when she has problems she doesn't feel comfortable discussing with us. It looks like you being involved in decisions about her education and activities, and major milestones. It looks like you having a real voice in how we raise her, not just being consulted after we've already made up our minds. This was more than I'd ever dared to hope for, not just inclusion, but genuine partnership in raising my granddaughter. The opportunity to pass on values and wisdom and family history in meaningful ways. That sounds wonderful. Are you sure Vanessa is comfortable with that level of involvement? She suggested. She said that she wants Emma to have the kind of stable, multi-generational support system that she never had. She said that watching how you've supported us through everything that's happened has convinced her that having strong extended family relationships is a gift, not a burden. A few days later, Vanessa and I were at the park with Emma, watching her explore the playground equipment with the fearless determination of a 1-year-old. She was wearing the little dress I'd bought her, the one with flowers embroidered on the hem, and her hair was beginning to curl at the ends, like Michael's had when he was small. "Sue, can I tell you something?" Vanessa asked as we sat on a bench, watching Emma examine fallen leaves with intense concentration. "Of course. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of mother I want to be, and I've realized that a lot of my ideas about parenting were shaped by fear, rather than love." "What do you mean?" "I was so afraid of being controlled or judged, that I was trying to eliminate any possibility of outside influence, even positive influence. I was so focused on being independent, that I was actually isolating myself and Emma from people who could enrich our lives. Fear can make us do things that don't align with our actual values." "Exactly. And my actual value is that I want Emma to be surrounded by people who love her, and support her, and want the best for her. I want her to have multiple sources of wisdom and guidance, and affection. She'll have that. I know she will. And Sue, I want you to know that I consider myself incredibly lucky to have you as Emma's grandmother. Not just because you're wonderful with her, but because you're the kind of person I want influencing her as she grows up. That means everything to me. I also want you to know that I've learned so much from watching how you handled everything that happened last year. You could have fought back when I was being unreasonable. You could have tried to turn Michael against me. You could have made everything much more dramatic and painful than it was. None of those approaches would have achieved what I actually wanted. Which was what? A healthy family that included everyone. Drama and manipulation and power struggles don't create healthy family. They just create more dysfunction. I'm grateful that you were wise enough to see that, even when I wasn't. As we walked home from the park, Emma babbling happily from her stroller and pointing at dogs and flowers and interesting shadows, I thought about how different this scene was from what I'd imagined a year ago. Then I'd been fighting just to maintain some minimal connection with my son's life. Now I was an integral part of a family that valued my contributions and welcomed my presence. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without challenges. There had been moments of awkwardness, as we all learned new ways of relating to each other. There had been conversations where we'd had to work through lingering hurt feelings, and establish new patterns of communication. There had been times when we'd had to consciously choose trust over suspicion, collaboration over competition, but the work had been worth it. We'd created something beautiful and sustainable, something that would benefit not just us but Emma Grace as she grew up. She would never know a family torn apart by unnecessary conflict. She would never have to choose between loving different people. She would grow up understanding that families can work through their problems and come out stronger on the other side. That evening, as I was making dinner, Michael called with news that made me laugh out loud. "Mom, you're not going to believe what Vanessa did today." "What?" "She called my office and asked if I wanted to invite you to come with us to Emma's first birthday party planning meeting. She said she wanted your input on the theme and decorations and guest list. She wants me involved in planning the party, not just involved, she wants you to co-host it. She said she thinks it would be more meaningful if it came from both Emma's mother and grandmother." I thought about the woman who just over a year ago had been determined to exclude me from every significant moment in their lives. Now she was asking me to co-host her daughter's first birthday celebration. What did you tell her? I told her I thought that was a wonderful idea, and that I was proud of both of you for building the kind of relationship that makes something like that possible. How do you feel about everything now? About your marriage? About our family? About how everything worked out? I feel grateful. Grateful that we all had the courage to work through our problems instead of giving up on each other. Grateful that Emma gets to grow up in a family where people choose love over fear. Grateful that I learned these lessons now, while I'm still young enough to apply them for the rest of my life. And Vanessa? How is she doing? She's thriving. She's more confident as a mother, more secure in our marriage, and more open to building relationships with people outside our immediate household. She's even talking about reaching out to her own family to see if some of those relationships can be repaired. That's wonderful. It is. And Mom, I want you to know that none of this would have been possible without your example. You showed us all what it looks like to choose grace over grudges, to prioritize relationships over being right, to have the patience to let people grow and change at their own pace. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the warm light of evening, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because I'd won some kind of competition with Vanessa, but because we'd all chosen to grow rather than remain stuck in patterns that weren't serving anyone. Emma Grace would grow up in a family that had learned these lessons the hard way, and because of that, she would be stronger and more resilient than she would have been otherwise. She would understand that relationships require work and patience and forgiveness. She would know that love doesn't mean avoiding conflict, but rather working through conflict with respect and commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone. Most importantly, she would grow up knowing that she belonged to something larger than herself, something that would support her and celebrate her, and provide guidance and wisdom throughout her life. She would never have to choose between the people she loved because the people who loved her had learned to love each other too. As I looked at the photo of Emma Grace on my refrigerator, I realized that everything we'd been through had led to this moment of peace and abundance.